Good evening. My name is Rachel Uram, and I serve as president of AJC Cleveland. On behalf of our partners, the Jewish Federation of Cleveland and the Maltz Museum of Jewish Heritage, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to tonight's program, Faith in Times of Crisis, the second in a series of conversations focused on current topics. We cannot begin this evening's program without acknowledging today's historic signing of the Abraham Accords between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. While our work of bridge building is far from complete, we welcome this new cooperation. We hope the agreements herald regional stability and prosperity, and ultimately advance the secure, just, and lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians that we all pray for. As summer wanes and the crisp fall air takes its place, it is a time of change and new beginnings. For Jews, with the high holidays commencing later this week, we enter a period of introspection, reflection, and remembrance. We each approach these holidays with our own unique mix of passion, determination, and unease. We know that this year will be different. We are living in complex times: global pandemic, economic uncertainty, extreme political polarization, a powerful juncture in the battle against racism and racial injustice, and rampant xenophobia. In times of crisis, many of us turn to our faith as we seek comfort, connection, community, spiritual guidance, a sense of security, answers, meaning, and hope. What does our faith and how does our faith inform our thoughts and actions? Before introducing our panel, I wanted to make sure I shared how to use your voice. Our panelists will take your questions this evening. So, to pose a question, please post it in the question box, which you will find at the bottom of your screen. Also, we all know that one of the best parts of attending these panel discussions is seeing friends and continuing the conversation. So after the formal program concludes, we invite you to stay and, as we say, schmooze. A link will be posted, which brings you into our Zoom where we can see one another and really continue the conversation. We have invited our panelists to join us as well. So now let me introduce our most distinguished panel and our moderator. Imam Ramez Islambouli is a professor at both Case Western University and Cleveland State University, teaching Islamic law, Arabic, and Islamic studies. He also serves as the Muslim chaplain at university hospitals. Reverend Dr. Marvin McMickle currently serves as interim pastor at Antioch Baptist Church, a church he led for almost 25 years, being named pastor emeritus in 2018. Prior to returning to Cleveland, Dr. McMickle, served as president of Colgate Rochester Crozer Divinity School and continues to serve on its faculty. A trusted leader in our community. Welcome home. Rabbi Allison Vann serves as the spiritual leader of Suburban Temple-Kol. She is the immediate past president of the Cleveland Board of Rabbis and also serves in leadership of RAC Ohio, a community organizing effort for the Reformed Jewish movement. You are all so impressive that I trip over all of your great credentials. We are lucky to have you all with us this evening. And our moderator tonight is AJC Director of Contemporary Jewish Life, Dr. Laura Shaw-Frank. Laura's credentials are also notable. She is an attorney and holds a doctorate in Jewish history. But having heard her speak on a number of issues recently, personally, I'm even more impressed with her articulate, nuanced, and intelligent approach to all that she does. Take it away, Laura.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much to Rachel and to Lisi and to the panel for having me with you tonight in Cleveland. I want to open with some words from the Bible. So in the Jewish faith, this week's Torah portion is Ha'azinu. And I'm going to read you just a verse from Ha'azinu and say something that I'm feeling about it. The verse I'm reading is Af chovev amim kol kadoshav biyadecha. God is a lover of all the people, and they're hallowed. All the holy ones are in God's hands. And to me, that verse speaks volumes about what we're doing here tonight. Because if ever we needed to feel the love of God and to feel that we are in, to anthropomorphize a little bit, God's hands, now is that time. We're in the midst of a pandemic. We're in the midst of a long overdue reckoning with respect to race in our country. And we're at the beginning of a school year and soon the beginning of a Jewish year, which is a time that is both exciting and this year also frightening. And I'm so happy and warmed, really, by the opportunity to be here tonight with these incredible members of the clergy who I can tell you from having spoken to them before are going to uplift all of us and make us all feel that love of God and maybe a little bit more security as we negotiate entering this new school year and this new Jewish year. So I'm going to start with a question. Well, actually, no, I'm sorry. I'm going to start by asking our panelists just to reflect a little bit about what faith in a time of crisis means to each one of you before I jump into my questions. So if I could go around and let's start with Rabbi Allison, just because she's on the top of my little screen there.
I was hoping you wouldn't call me first. So faith in a time of crisis to me means finding strength when we feel really overwhelmed. And strength comes in so many different forms. Strength can come from community, strength can come from prayer, strength can come from finding a new outlet in creativity. And when we need it most, we have to turn to new sources. And so faith to me is finding a new opportunity to really dig in deeper to our soul, our nefesh, our ruach, two different words for the essence of who we are, so that we can keep moving forward.
Thank you so much. Reverend.
First of all, good evening to everybody. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be a part of this discussion. I know there was an earlier round of conversations with a similar group gathered by the Maltz Museum that included my dear friend Otis Moss in a different conversation. So I'm grateful to be a part of round two and to share with all my colleagues in tonight's discussion. As I indicated to all of you earlier when we were talking about this program, I come from a tradition that begins to find its sense of hope and strength in Scripture. And so I want to work my way to several of the Psalms. But before I do, I just want to remind us all of a quote from Franklin Delano Roosevelt that he spoke in March of 1933. When he was inaugurated as our nation's 32nd president, these are the words that Roosevelt spoke. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. I think that helps to phrase where we are. We are, I think, all of us confronted by a sense in which there is much that we should be afraid of. afraid of the continuing effects of COVID-19, both in terms of death, infection, unemployment, its impact on our economy. Afraid of the fires that are raging all along the Pacific coast and the smoke from them that is wafting its way to the eastern part of the country. Frightful about, as someone has already said, the reckoning about race relations in this country, the collision almost between Black Lives Matter as an affirmation of African American life in this country and the reaction that it almost always generates in terms of persons who still want to affirm a kind of white supremacist view of the world. And more recently for me, the fear that I'm no longer able to believe things that are being said from our national government to try to give us hope about how to proceed. I never thought that there'd be a time when I would have to say that I just do not believe a single word that comes from the mouth of the President of the United States. And so we have a lot of things to fear. But I'm also with Roosevelt. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, if we've got faith that helps us to offset those fears. So with my colleagues, let me just share these few quick Psalmic references. First, Psalm 91, verses 5 and 6. You will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday. Psalm 93, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Psalm 27, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? And Psalm 46, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way. It's all right to be afraid. Just don't let fear have the last word.
Thank you so much for that. Imam Islambouli, please.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. I would like to start by greeting you with our Islam greeting, Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. I'd like to share with you a few words from our Islamic tradition. It's words that were said by a father to his son as he was passing away. He said, my dear son, you will not taste the reality of faith until you understand and realize that what had hit you was not meant to miss you, and what missed you was not meant to hit you. Oh, my dear son, the first thing that God has created was the pen. And the pen asked, what should I write? And God said, write the decree of everything that will happen. Thus, as people of faith, we need to establish a belief in the divine decree and establish our faith in the divine wisdom. And understand that sometimes circumstances are beyond our control. We do our best, we try our best with whatever faculties God has granted us, but then also we put our trust in God. It's easy to talk about faith when we are not tested with difficulties, with calamities, and with crises. Our faith should be firm in God and God's wisdom. And always I like this prophetic quote that says, don't ever say if this happened or if that did not happen, but always put your faith in God, because if always open the door for doubt promoted by Satan. That's why it's very important, as we are challenged in these difficult times, to put our faith in God and God's wisdom, use all faculties that are given to us, especially the knowledge that was granted to us and gained, to have a firm belief in God the Almighty, and then do our best, to change what need to be changed.
Thank you so much. Your words, all three of you, have already uplifted me, and I'm sure our audience as well. Our questions tonight range from the very practical to the very spiritual. And I know that we will learn so much from each of you through both discussing the practical and the spiritual. There's so much to get to. So I'm going to start with a question that is a more of the practical nature. As members of the clergy, you've been used to interacting with your congregations and your communities in person. So this pandemic, as we all know, has forced us all to make a very rapid and head-spinning pivot to online spaces. How have you each managed this pivot in your community? And what challenges have you found that virtual space posed to you? At the same time, also, if you could reflect on opportunities, maybe unexpected opportunities that the virtual space provided to you. Okay, so, if any of you would like to jump in first, otherwise I can just be the moderator and sort of call on you. Anyone want to jump in first? Let's start with.
Let me go ahead and
I'm going to call on you.
Never known for being reluctant. Let me say three things about that. The first of which is I really thank God that Zoom and other electronic internet-related technologies are available to us, because they've allowed us wonderful opportunities to reach out to people who otherwise we could not get to because of the restrictions of social distancing and COVID-19. So on the one side, we've discovered the real efficiencies that Zoom and other platforms have provided. I pre-record my sermons on a Wednesday at the church. It's just me and a technician in the sanctuary. We then play them back on Sunday, and persons can either listen on the web page of the church, or they can do it through Facebook or YouTube. So those are wonderful opportunities. The downside is we've got a fairly elderly congregation in many respects, and not all of them are comfortable accessing this technology. And so how do we keep them connected if in fact we rely overly on technology as the means to do it? And that is the risk that we run. And so we try to use the telephone as much as we can to stay in touch with people and to make sure that at least on Zoom, if they cannot Zoom in, they can at least call in. And the third thing I want to say is I've discovered since we went onto these electronic platforms that in point of fact, our congregation has greatly expanded beyond the driving distance of Cleveland, Ohio. Because of YouTube, because of Zoom, because of the other formats, we're now getting many, many more people tuning into our Bible classes and to our prayer meetings and to our Sunday morning services from Texas, from California, from all around the country, every now and then from someplace else around the world. So it has had its upsides and its down. But as a Black Baptist who loves to hug people and shake hands and kiss cheeks and go down to the fellowship hall and share a meal, I must confess we are deeply missing that level of intimacy, and I just can't wait, hopefully, to get back to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Rabbi.
Yes. So I would really echo everything that Reverend McMickle said and expand on it. And we too pivoted and moved immediately to Zoom. We have found that live services really are what our congregation craves. And so every Shabbat Eve, I am live with my music director because we crave that connection. And so because I'm live, when I make a mistake, because I am human, or when I forget to unmute, because that is you're muted is the line of 2020. We are together, and we are together in our fallibility. And so our experiences, we find that connection. So we have really leveraged our technology as much as possible. And we also have the Jewish community in Cleveland is an older population, and so right away we asked our board of trustees to reach out and call every member of the congregation. We had over 80% reached in some way or another, whether on phone or actual snail mail or email. And then we continued with really trying to demarcate who our most fragile and vulnerable populations are and trying to stay in touch with them. We call it Congregation Connected, and continuing to try to make sure we are connected to one another every way possible. We encourage our members to post services, have Zoom Shabbat dinners together, and to do whatever they can to stay connected in whatever ways they can. When the numbers were good, lower in Cleveland, we're blessed with beautiful property in Beechwood. And so we had what we called Takeout Tuesdays, and we encouraged our members to come to the synagogue property. The building was not open, and we spray painted big circles onto our lawn, and everyone sat in circles with their dinners, and we sat outside together. Once the numbers went back up to red, we stopped them. So our goal is to be safe and to be together as much as possible. And so we know that we are very much leveraging technology, desperately missing those hugs. Reverend McMickle, you are not the only one who loves to hug and kiss and eat. We do it well too.
Yeah.
And really trying to figure out, we have Congregation Connected 1.0, Congregation Connected 2.0, and now working on Congregation Connected 3.0. It's very hard and
Yes,
very necessary.
Yeah, it really is. Imam.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Reverend and Rabbi has said about, the positives and the negatives. The positives is that, as I said, Reverend McMickle said that, thank God that we have the technology that would allow us to reach a very wide range of congregants. Imagine if we were, at a time where, we cannot do that. But also the negatives of missing this in-person experience. I'd like also to add a couple of things. The first one is with the COVID-19 virus, and again, there is a fear among people, and you don't want to bring people into houses of worship in the midst of a sermon, and there's this fear inside them. Are they worried about, if someone coughed beside them or sneezed, sometimes we travel and we have this fear. So Zoom and this virtual, media has allowed us to connect with congregants, and also these congregants have the peace of mind, to be part of that without fearing for their lives and fearing that they might contract something that impact their loved ones. And this is well understood. The other thing which is also interesting, and I do this, I would like to share my experience as a professor, that I conduct most of my classes at least through the virtual media, through Zoom. And it's so interesting that in these classes, I have my students, and also sometimes their parents, their mom and their dad, the grandma and the pets also, they sit and they listen. And in our services, if someone said, I don't want to go to the mosque, I don't have the time, it's raining, or, all type of excuses. It's interesting that when you have the computer and the camera, really there's no excuse but to sit and listen. So this is where some of the positives. The negative is, again, the in-person. I'm not like, the reverend, like the hugs and, but I like the in-person. I like to look in the eyes of my congregation. I don't like to look through the screen. I feel that there's a kind of barrier. I like this eye to eye without any barriers, and the screen is still a barrier. I like to hear the voice not channeled through a microphone, but directly from the mouth to the ear. The screen hides. As I always say, you can be in your pajamas sitting and conducting, but so you can hide things. But when it's person to person, really there's not a lot to hide. And that's what really I miss, So I hope and pray that, this period pass so we can go back to this in-person and connect again, person to person and eye to eye and voice to voice.
Thank you.
Laura, if I might be able to just follow up, we have been experimenting more recently, particularly around occasions of weddings and funerals, with smaller gatherings that are live. All of the social restrictions, all of the obligations in terms of distancing and taking temperatures and such are being used. But I do think that when it comes to a funeral, to the extent that we can be together in those moments, I've done 4 now since this problem with the virus emerged, and it's working for us to do it that way. But that's about as close as we've come to sort of in live events.
I actually wanted to ask a follow-up question on this topic to all of you, because I think that it's really resonant for me as a congregant, and also as someone who's married to a member of the clergy myself, about reaching and those who are in virtual space with us. And I can totally relate. I feel like I'm teaching on Zoom all the time, and I want to meet the eyes of the people that I'm teaching, and I can't. And all the more so when you're leading people in prayer or trying to have a spiritual space, it's even more problematic not to be able to meet people's eyes. So I wanted to just follow up to ask about 2 populations. One of the populations I want to ask about specifically is a question that somebody has submitted through the chat box, and I was going to save the questions for the end, but this one is so relevant at this moment that I'm just going to inject it now, which is about serving the elderly. And Reverend, you spoke a little bit already about serving the elderly, and I think maybe all 3 of you touched on that. But this participant asked, how do you serve the elderly who are totally quarantined in nursing homes or assisted living facilities and are deeply depressed and sometimes wondering why they have lived this long? So I want to leave that question, and I want to add one other piece to that, which is the elderly is a population that struggles with technology. Many of them have become quite adept. I know my mother is quite a Zoomer now, and she's over 80. But we know that the technology is certainly a problem for the elderly, but technology also poses problems for other populations with different abilities. And how do we reach those populations who perhaps are hard of hearing, or perhaps are not sighted, or who perhaps are not adept enough to be able to manipulate computer keys for whatever, or suffer from other maladies or other different abilities? How do we reach those people?
I'd just
I'll let any of you
jump in and speak. Okay, I'd like to jump in because I had an experience with both cases that you mentioned. I'm very thankful that people who were quarantined, especially in nursing homes, that the staff there, the healthcare providers, have been very helpful. And most of those who I counseled or I pastored, were unable to use Zoom or any type of computer. And what they did is they would just bring the phone to their ears and I would be talking to them. Some of them, you really are unable even to hold the phone. So some of the nurses, I'm really thankful that they went beyond what is expected, and they will bring the phone to the ear and I will be speaking, reading some scripture and talking to them. And so this is on one hand. The other thing is really sometimes, how to say it, we have to take some risks. One time I had a funeral, a lady, an elderly lady who passed away from Florida during the rise of cases in Florida, and she was brought to Cleveland to be buried here. And really not a lot wanted to be in person in her funeral, although she didn't have the COVID, but people were fearful. So sometimes you have to make the risk and you have to make the call. And I made the call that with proper, social distancing, wearing a mask, I can be there for the family. I don't want it to be buried just by the workers there at the funeral home or at the cemetery. So I was there, and some of their relatives. And I said, I go to the store and I go to places where I have to buy stuff. So I can be in that, situation and I can help. So that's why sometimes we have to put, as Rabbi McMickle said, we have to put fear a little bit aside, take proper precautions and do what you expect to do, proper social distancing with a mask, and you can be in person and help those people who sometimes through the virtual media does not work. They need this in person. They need the touch sometimes.
Mm-hmm. So true. Anyone else want to weigh in before I go to my next question about reaching the elderly or reaching the differently abled?
I would like to. And I'll try to make it brief because I know there's so many questions.
Oh, yes.
I think this is really indicative of the complexity of the time that we're in. And one of the things that when our staff were first trying to figure out all of this, and we felt like all of the decisions were just coming at us one after another, after another, after another, we tried to sit back and really figure out what is it that we really hold most dear. And ultimately we landed on a number of values that we focused on the most. And the values that we focused on the most were pikuach nefesh, which is saving a life, and kedusha, which is holiness, and that every situation must be addressed with the utmost holiness. And these are the two things that we balance constantly. And we're constantly, how do we save a life and how do we approach it with holiness? And these are so complex and so hard. So we have almost every Friday night a teenage boy who joins our service who wears hearing aids and can't speak. And it's one of the reasons, along with many, many, many other reasons, that we have on our screen a slide deck, slides like PowerPoint, so that because we can't have an interpreter, but he can read, and so he is then included. He can hear mostly, and so he's then included because he's not forced to read my lips through a screen, which is hard. And we are not. I'm not obviously not wearing a mask, but he can read the service and mostly hear the music. In terms of those in nursing homes and in facilities, this is terrifically difficult. And I think that I'm so grateful for those. I think that Imam is correct. I think nurses and aides and caregivers have gone above and beyond everything of their call to make that connection. And I I don't have great answers. I know that so many congregations across Cleveland, across the country, have done letter writing campaigns and cards, and those are important. If you love someone and they can receive phone calls, there are also people inside institutions that are teaching when able to use a fire tablet, because they're only $49, and so they're very, very cheap. And that way people can try to have some connection. But this loneliness is really, really dire. My own mother is in a nursing home, and we've worked on this idea of pachad, of when do you push aside and when do you not. And my sister has been visiting her, because that is so healing for her. And my mom also has a back door, so she can sneak in. Don't tell the nursing home.
Your secret's safe with us.
Well, she lives in Texas, so unless you're going to call them in Texas, my secret's very safe.
I don't know. Reverend McMickle seems to have a nationwide following.
I know. Reverend McMickle, tell your congregation.
Yes, I'll tell them that mum's the word. Let me just tell a quick story, if I might. Only that my wife's mother, my mother-in-law, was in a nursing home in Georgia during the height of this COVID problem. She did not have the virus, but we could not go to visit her as we had done every other month. And so we had to use something called Google Chat. And an aide in the nursing home was assigned to go from bed to bed, and you had a prescribed time when you could call. So we at least had that opportunity to talk to her, but she died in the nursing home, and nobody from the family was with her when she died.
And we hear that story so many times.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking. I want to turn in a moment to talking about the reckoning that our nation is doing with respect to racism in our society. But before I do, I just have one quick follow-up question that came through the chat for the Imam. Imam Islambouli, if you could just answer us this quick question. Observant Jews, as you I'm sure know, don't use technology on the Sabbath or holidays. And we also have some limitations on reciting prayers without a quorum, a prayer quorum called a minyan of 10 adults, and some settings 10 men or 10 men and women. So are there similar restrictions in Islam for virtual settings?
Well, in the beginning of the crisis, there was a big debate, among Muslims, especially the conservative Muslims, about how come you are going to close mosques? How come you cannot have a congregational prayer? What do you mean we cannot have, our Friday noon services? So there was this big debate, and those who are, familiar with Islamic prayers, people stand shoulder to shoulder, foot to foot, in very close proximity. And people sit on the floor. So people are really in very close proximity to each other. And then you are prostrating on the floor, which means your nose and your mouth is hitting the carpet. And again, there's a lot of risk. So there was this debate, about that. And even the discussion, is a prayer valid? Is a service valid when you cannot be on the same area as the imam, as the leading? And he said, no, you cannot. You cannot be at home on the internet listening to a service and claim that I've attended the noon service prayers. Like you are at home and Sunday morning I'm listening to the service and I've attended mass, okay? So there were people debated, is this valid or not? But as the crisis moved on, many in the conservative circle have lessened their objection, because what's the alternative? The alternative is either people coming to the mosque, attending services and getting sick. And it's a reality. As you see the number of deaths climbing, then you know that this is not a joke, that coming to the mosque, congregating in the Islamic way is going to pose a problem, okay? And, what's a bigger sin, missing a service or dying, putting yourself in danger and causing. So that's why people said, no, you don't want to put yourself in danger. What is the alternative? And that's why people said, okay, let's do virtual prayers, or let's do, whatever we are doing via Zoom or via, any other media. But there was the objection. There are still till now, like in any other religious tradition, there are always this small group of stubborn people who, whatever you tell them, they are still going to stick to their mind and saying, no, we have to congregate in a group. And if we got sick, it's from God. It's always, you have this type of group.
Right. We certainly go through a lot of those same kinds of negotiations and arguments in Judaism, very, very much so. And there's been all kinds of conversation in the sort of Jewish communal discussion world about the high holidays coming up. And I see synagogues doing every which thing, from synagogues meeting in person outside, to meeting in people's backyards, to meeting on Zoom. And hopefully not too many meeting in person, not socially distanced and endangering their congregants. Okay, I want to turn now to this issue of the racial reckoning that's going on in our nation right now. This is a long overdue reckoning with systemic racism. And, we've gone through reckonings before and things have not changed or have not changed enough. And of course, I think we're all hoping that this time things will be different. In the past, the integration of spiritual and public life was a really central part of so many American houses of worship. And now, when we kind of need the integration of spiritual and public life more than ever, because we're in this moment where we need our clergy people and we need our faith communities to be speaking out and to be fighting systemic racism, we find ourselves siloed in our own homes in a pandemic that prevents us from having the robust public life we had before. So I'm wondering if you could reflect on how you've addressed that issue in your community, the issue of wanting to be a place that is an integration of spiritual and public life, and at the same time having to deal with the fact that while we're in this moment where we need intense public engagement, we're in a pandemic.
Perhaps I will go first on this, and I want to frame it. And I'm so glad, Laura, that you referenced the fact that we've been here before. This is not the first time our nation has tried a reckoning. As a matter of fact, in Eddie Glaude's new book, Eddie Glaude from Princeton, who's also an MSNBC commentator, he wrote a book called Beginning Again, or Begin Again. It's a reflection on the writings of James Baldwin. And in that book, he reminds us that there were at least two major moments in American history when this reckoning tried to happen. The first was after the Civil War and the era of Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877, and then there was the backlash. The next one was the Civil Rights Movement, 1955 to 1968, and then there was a backlash. And what I think is happening in our country today is that we're setting ourselves up for the same phenomenon. We're still trying to make the country live up to its own creed of all persons being created equal, but there's still the backlash of those who do not want to give up power or privilege. And so I'm concerned that as we answer this question, we answer it knowing that whatever forward steps we take, there are persons already at work trying to push back against that. What we've done at Antioch and in my own clergy circles is to simply, one, incorporate these messages as much as we can in our sermons and Bible studies so that we're projecting these issues forward. We're sending as much as we can out through our church newsletters in terms of readings and other reminders of what's happening on this matter. I've been very fortunate since I came back to Cleveland that the Plain Dealer has been willing to receive some of my editorials. And in fact, they've agreed to do one I think sometime this week that kind of deals with the book by Bob Woodward and various persons' reactions to it. So if you can write, if you can post on Facebook, if you can, use your church newsletter, and if you can work with clergy organizations, Greater Cleveland Congregations is an interfaith vehicle. We can still talk to one another, even if we cannot reach beyond that to the broader society. But we at least ought to be doing what we're doing right now, which is leaders from various faith traditions staying in touch with each other. So when this finally goes away, we don't have to get introduced to each other. We already know who we are, and we can just pick the ball up and go forward.
I'd like to add here is that, the religious message that we all follow usually have two goals. One is to govern the relationship between us and our Creator. But there's also another goal, that the religious message should also govern our relationship between us as human beings. So it works both ways. So when we talk in our houses of worship about how to fix our relationship with God, we are also going to talk about how to fix our relationship with other human beings that we share this earth together. The other thing is that, you cannot see something wrong and claim that, it's not my business. There's a prophetic tradition that says, when you see something wrong, the first thing you need to do is try to change it with your hand. But if you are unable, then you change it with your speak against it. And if you are unable, then the lowest of faith, the lowest level of faith and iman, as in the word for faith in Arabic, is that you hate it in your heart. So each one of us has to ask himself and herself, what is my level of involvement and what capacity I can involve myself to when I see something wrong? And racism is something wrong. There are people who cannot see it. They can see it the other way around, but clearly it's something wrong. And we need to either change it with our hand, speak against it, or hate it in our heart. And when it comes to racism, it's interesting that in the Islamic tradition, the first racist is Satan. In Islam, when God created the human being Adam and asked Satan to acknowledge the superiority of Adam, Satan refused. He said, I'm of a different nature than him. Okay, I'm better than him. And he refused and he disobeyed God. So thus racism is a satanic behavior, and whoever follow this type of behavior, he's following his teacher, Satan. And that's why it's part of the Islamic message to speak against that, because it's going to impact all of us. You cannot stay home and say, racism not impacting me or my children, because there are always people who will be racist, and will be against you, whether if your ethnic background, whether the color of your skin, whether the way you speak, whether where you came from, all forms of racism. People are so creative that they create racist behavior for themselves. And we need to speak against that. It's going to impact us whether we like it or not,
Indeed.
The thing that I am thinking about is that the definition of our public square, where we gather to try to make change, is radically changing. And we all want so badly to be normal. And I don't know what normal's going to look like when we have a handle on COVID. And I think we're all going to be different when this is done, whatever done looks like. And so the definition of where we gather and how we make change is changing. It doesn't absolve us in any way of making that change. In fact, it increases our obligation. it makes it even more important, because now we have to figure out two things. Not only do we have the obligation to push into this reckoning, we also have to figure out the how, because thousands and thousands and thousands of people spent time on the streets because that reckoning is necessary. And now we have to make sure that that happens. And I am looking in my Machzor and my High Holy Day prayer book, and it talks so profoundly. There's a whole page of prayer so profoundly about our obligation as American Jews and as Jews, lo tuchal lehitalem, that we cannot remain indifferent, and that we are all, every single one of us, made b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And therefore, we have to figure this out. We have to keep moving into this reckoning so that we don't do it again and again and again.
Thank you. We have two questions in the chat that are really important, and we have so little time left. So I'm going to ask each one of them, and I'm going to ask you to keep your remarks as brief as you can, so we can, every word that each of you is saying is so precious and beautiful. And yet we're going to balance and try to keep the answers as quick as possible, so that we can get to all of our wonderful questions that we have here. So this is a question from Greg Levine. Some clergy leaders may be afraid to speak out on key issues because we've become so polarized as a community. They don't want to disenfranchise any in the congregation. This is very frustrating. What are your thoughts?
My job as a rabbi is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. I'm gonna leave it there.
Beautiful. Comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. I think I need a laptop sticker that says that. Beautiful.
I could go on and on and on and on, but I'm gonna leave it alone.
Exactly. Good. That was what I meant. A short answer. Good.
I'm going to go to the book of Amos and say that religious leaders are either Amos or Amaziah. Their allegiance is either to God and where that leads, or to secular authority in order to maintain the status quo. But you can't be both, and you've got to make a decision.
Beautiful. Imam.
Yeah, I have this interesting quote that says, the clergy people are like salt that is used to preserve the food and give the food its taste. But what is going to preserve the salt if the salt went wrong? So it is very important that as a clergy, you need to take your role in promoting justice and speaking, against whatever you see wrong. But also this means that you as a clergy need to understand that this is wrong. The problem is that if you are a clergy and you cannot see that this is wrong. And that's why, it's always important that we as clergy, we need to work on our own understanding, our own spirituality, our own, relationship with God, and make sure that we understand that this is right and this is wrong. And then understand our role to speak against what we see as wrong and, challenge those who want to promote the wrong. Otherwise, stay home and don't put yourself in a position. Don't be a leader if you are not willing to lead and direct people to what is right. You cannot tailor, things. You cannot come to me and tell me, I want you to speak about this from my perspective. One time in congregation, someone came to me and told me, you shouldn't speak this, you should speak that way. I said, well, guess what? Take my position, okay? I will sit and listen to you. If you want to tell me, what to say and why you are here. You are here to hear, the advice and what we want to tell you, okay? So it is challenging, and clergy have to take their role, as people who have put themselves in a position to be leaders of people.
Thank you. And one last question we have time for, and this is from Jeremy Sosin. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And we're going to make it real quick answers because we have 5 minutes and we still want to give time to close us out at the end. What trends are you seeing for engagement within your communities, whether a turning toward or a turning and drifting away? Are there particularly notable ways that your engagement now is actually better than it was before. So I think, Reverend McMickle, you already addressed the better. You said that you're getting people from all around the country. If anyone else would like to weigh in on that, and also any of the three of you, real quick answer. Do you see, what kind of trends are you seeing with engagement in your communities, turning toward or turning or drifting away?
So we do have some concern about drift away because we all have online fatigue. In terms, I'll just lift up one thing about drifting towards. We're learning a lot about technology and ways to do that and ways to be better. And so I have created an opportunities for our members to have half-hour one-on-one appointments with me. Whereas typically in congregations, you have to go through the administrative assistant and make an appointment, and there's barriers. So I've removed those barriers, and people can directly make an appointment with me very easily online. And I am having a lot of one-on-one appointments, and they are so meaningful, and they're really, really, really important. And they're more and more and more. So that's been a real positive, in addition to lots of things that are upticks, lots of more people on services, things like that. But that one thing has just really been extraordinary.
Thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in?
As I mentioned earlier in our previous conversation, my greatest concern is that within the American society, the fastest growing segment of people who religiously identify themselves is none. N-O-N-E.
Mm-hmm.
And try as we might, it is becoming harder and harder to hold on to our own segment as a secularization kicks in. So I'm deeply concerned that what we're trying to do as leaders of faith traditions is being challenged by an increasingly secularized culture.
Thank you. That's so.
Yeah, there are two things I would like to share with you here. The first one is, even before the crisis that hit us, especially with the COVID, talking about COVID-19, we always struggle, with those who are lazy and they don't want to come to the mosque, and those who, they have like they are on the edge. They want to come, but they don't want. So there's always, we are always trying our best, okay, to be creative, trying to attract these people and increase the number of congregants who come to the mosque. And then COVID-19 came, and it presented itself as a good excuse for people not to come. So in the past, people have all type of excuses. I have homework, I have, travel, I have a lot of things I need to worry. I don't have the time to go to the mosque or the church or the synagogue. COVID-19 gave them an opportunity, okay, to really not involve themselves in, in any type of religious worship. So this is a challenge that, you are fighting against this pandemic, and how you want to bring these people who already have this type of laziness in them. So this is what you call it, a challenge. The other thing is, and I totally agree with Reverend McMickle, I see it a trend, especially in my schoolwork. I teach courses on, world religions. And usually I ask my students, if you would like to share with me your background or your religious background. And through the years that I've been teaching at universities, I've seen a rise in the trend of those who are agnostic. They will tell you, I come from, my mom is Catholic, my dad is Jewish, but I'm agnostic. Or I come from a Presbyterian, but I'm not practicing anymore. I've seen especially among the new generation, the younger generation, a rise level of agnostics and atheists who don't feel religion really is part of their life. And this is a very dangerous trend that I see among, especially the new generation. And COVID-19 came, and they become more worried about their schoolwork and how they to achieve, get to work and something like that.
Absolutely. So before I turn it over to Rachel to close up our program and to invite everyone to the breakout rooms to schmooze, which I really hope that you will do, I just wanted to say that I think I feel so uplifted by all of you. And I think that Cleveland is very lucky, and indeed America is very lucky to have such a thoughtful group of members of the clergy who can help us all chart the waters in this incredibly complicated time that we're living through. So I really want to thank you all. And I want to wish everyone out there a Shana Tova if you are Jewish and observing the Jewish New Year. And for all of us, I hope that it will be a year of peace and of harmony and of national growth and most of all of health. I'm going to turn it back over to Rachel now.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Imam. Thank you, Reverend. Thank you, Rabbi. And I personally feel like the connectedness that was shown here and your inspiring words really brought down some of the barriers that you all talked about. So thank you so much for taking the time. And I just want to say on behalf of AJC Cleveland, the Jewish Federation of Cleveland, and the Maltz Museum of Jewish Heritage, we would like to thank all of you for joining us tonight. We invite you to join us for our next discussion, which is called From Ferguson to Today on Monday, October 12th. And that will be with Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and Shaker grad, Wes Lowry, in conversation with WKYC's Russ Mitchell. For those of you, as we mentioned, who'd like to stay a little bit longer, they're going to post the link so that you can link to that. And for those of you leaving us now and who celebrate, we want to wish you a Shana Tova, a happy, healthy, and good year. Thank you so much.